I recently made a video where I discussed why, personally, I feel that Oppo Blu-ray players still reign supreme over current Blu-ray players, even though they are now extinct. But I just may have found another way to squeak out more value from your defunct Oppo 203 or 205 4K Blu-ray player when paired with an HD Fury 4K DIVA and an HDR or HDR10 Plus display or projector. Let's discuss. So, how do you add value to a defunct line of Blu-ray players from Oppo? HDR10 Plus. Yes, your 203 or 205 does support HDR10 Plus, and this is extremely beneficial if you have a Samsung TV, because Samsung does not support Dolby Vision, and HDR10 Plus might benefit you in other ways, depending on your setup. But more on that in a bit. Now, while this same information can apply to other Blu-ray players as well that support HDR10 Plus, my dedicated Blu-ray player is an Oppo UDP-203. So during this video, I'll only be referring to Oppo's 4K Blu-ray players in a very specific setup with HD Fury products. But this can still work if you have a different HDR10 Plus capable Blu-ray player. Now, I know what you're gonna say next. HDR10 Plus only exists on Samsung TVs, and Amazon Prime is the only place that you can find content. But that's not true. There are 4K Blu-rays that do support HDR10 Plus. I'll leave a link in the description where you can check out all the HD Blu-rays that support HDR10 Plus. And if you can find them, there are some Panasonic TVs out in the wild that also support HDR10 Plus. Also, HDR10 Plus, while the direct competitor to Dolby Vision, HDR10 Plus is still somewhat inferior because it only supports 10-bit color versus Dolby Vision's 12-bit color. But that's the only difference. And make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because I'll be doing a future video on whether or not there's a discernible difference between viewing HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision content. If your Oppo 203 or 205 is up to date on its latest firmware, then you'll be able to activate HDR10 Plus when paired with an HD Fury 4K DIVA or with a few of their other products. So let's briefly discuss a couple scenarios and see why you might want to use HDR10 Plus over Dolby Vision. And I think you'll find the data to be quite interesting. So let's say that you have a Samsung TV that supports HDR10 Plus. Cool. I can watch maybe a handful of shows on Amazon with HDR10 Plus, but it's still streaming, so there's still going to be compression. But if you want to watch those 4K crispy Blu-rays and all of the HDR glory, you're going to need a Blu-ray player that has HDR10 Plus support. Just like low latency Dolby Vision, you need a Blu-ray player or streaming device that supports Dolby Vision. The Oppo 203 and 205 supports both formats. Now, for context, all 4K Blu-rays are required to have HDR10 metadata. However, Dolby Vision is optional and not required. It's left up to the movie studio to include Dolby Vision. And I would assume that the same goes for HDR10 Plus. So no matter what 4K Blu-ray movie you buy, it's gonna have HDR10. That's why sometimes if you look on the back of a disc cover, it might say HDR10 and Dolby Vision support. However, you might not know that not all TVs that support Dolby Vision is the full version. Some TVs only employ low latency Dolby Vision. And in this video and the scenarios that we'll discuss, when I use Dolby Vision verbiage, just know that it's gonna be the low latency Dolby Vision version. But I'll be using both terminology. Okay, so back to our scenario. You've got a Samsung TV with HDR10 Plus and an Oppo UDP-203 or 205 player. Well, the Oppos both support HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision. And throw in an HD Fury 4K DIVA, and now you can watch movies in either format. However, it can get a little complicated. While I was testing to see what HDR10 Plus looked like, I couldn't get my Oppo to activate HDR10 Plus content. Nowhere in the settings of my Oppo 203 is there a way to toggle or set priority for Dolby Vision or HDR10 Plus. In fact, there is zero mention of HDR10 Plus anywhere in the settings. So it seems for dynamic HDR, the player is set to use Dolby Vision by default. So then I went to the HD Fury Diva's web GUI and I went to the EDIT selector to see if I could manually force an HDR10 Plus signal. And voila, there are only two options for HDR10 Plus. Now, in order to force HDR10 Plus content, you have to select the EDIT with only HDR10 Plus. If you select the HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision, the Oppo still defaults to Dolby Vision and there's no way to toggle between the two. So I selected the number 4 HDR10 Plus profile, loaded up Godzilla vs. Kong, which supports both Dolby Vision and HDR10 Plus, and sure enough, I got the HDR10 Plus flag pop up on my Oppo. And then I checked the 4K Diva's info tab to see what signal I was getting. And indeed, it was HDR10 Plus. So that begs the question, if the Oppo supports both HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision, why would you pick HDR10 Plus over low latency Dolby Vision since Dolby Vision supports more colors? Here's why. If we take a look at the info tab of the HD Fury 4K Diva, it shows that the native HDR10 Plus signal is 4K 23.973, 444, BT 2020, 12-bit HDR10 Plus at 445 MHz 2.2, and it's downsampling to a 4K 23.973, 422, BT 2020, 12-bit HDR10 Plus at 297 MHz 2.2. And here's where it gets interesting. I decided to switch back to low latency Dolby Vision and check the info tab to see what signal I was getting. And I was very surprised to see the results. When forcing a low latency Dolby Vision signal, the signal is 4K 23.973, 422, BT 2020 12-bit low latency Dolby Vision at 297 MHz 2.2. So, HDR10 Plus, while inferior to the full version of Dolby Vision, you actually get a better native signal than low latency Dolby Vision. Now, in my setup, I'm using an Epson 5040 UB projector, which probably maxes out at 300 or 400 nits with a max of 18 gigabits per second speeds. So the Diva still has to convert the signal to 422 and 297 MHz 2.2. But this is interesting because if you have a Samsung TV with HDR10 Plus that's going to get much brighter than a projector, you're going to get the full bandwidth of HDR10 Plus as opposed to low latency Dolby Vision. And our second scenario, if you have a newer projector with HDMI 2.1 capabilities and support for HDR10 Plus, like the Epson LS12000, you're probably going to get the full bandwidth with HDR10 Plus versus low latency Dolby Vision. It's also worth noting that Dolby Vision still has to be converted back into an HDR10 container for low latency Dolby Vision, whereas the HDR10 Plus container is direct while only having to downsample the actual image quality. So, one would assume that on a full bandwidth capable display, the low latency Dolby Vision container would convert to an HDR10 Plus container, but I don't know. Low latency Dolby Vision might only be capable of converting to an HDR10 container because from the looks of it, it looks like low latency Dolby Vision maxes out at 422 and 297 MHz 2.2. And if that's the case, then it's limited to HDR10 bandwidth. So that tells me that HDR10 Plus is superior to low latency Dolby Vision. And in theory, picture quality should look better because while your setup might have to convert the 444 chroma sampling to 422 like mine, there's more information and more colors to pull from. But it begs the question, can your eyes even tell the difference? Again, make sure you're subscribed to the channel because I'll be doing a separate video comparing HDR10 Plus versus low latency Dolby Vision. So my query of the week for you is, what are your thoughts on these findings? Are you surprised that low latency Dolby Vision is capped out at 422 versus HDR10 Plus's 444? Sound off in the comments. If you found this video helpful, do me a favor and hit the like button so that the algorithm can help others find it. As always, no matter where you're at on your home theater journey, make sure you enjoy it. For Haterade Cowboy Cinema, I'm Haterade Cowboy, and I'll see you guys in the next video.